Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of my Kitchen Table Talks as I invite people out of the cold in this northern hemisphere winter and to the kitchen table. And today I have my friend Dave Gaddy coming on. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So you're very welcome, Dave. So Dave Gaddy, for those people, you may have seen him online, you may have seen his work at various different places, especially if you're in the South there. But for those of you who don't know who Dave is the Weathered Wise Man, and as the Weathered Wise Man, Dave is descended from over 5 generations of folk whose lives were steeped in the magic and mystery of the Appalachian Mountains. Early in his career, he studied theology and became an ordained minister. Then his true calling brought him home to his roots and to embracing the magical arts in the Appalachian folk tradition and nature magic. With over 30 years devoted to his craft, he is wise in the ways of animal magic, emotional and spiritual healing, with special focus on the masculine spirit, bone throwing, intuitive readings, and ancestral work. And it's around ancestral work that Dave is soon to become a published author. And we were just discussing this beforehand. The hopeful expected date is March of this year, but it'll be this year sometime, won't it, Dave?
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful. That's so congratulations. That's so
Thank
awesome.
you.
So if you're interested in learning more about Dave, go to weatheredwiseman.org. And of course, I will put that down in the show notes. So again, welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
I think your background looks more like a cozy cottage than mine does right now.
Well, it's amazing what a Google image will do.
Right.
Otherwise, you're seeing the kitchen behind me.
Oh, well, and so maybe we'll start off with that because so much of your magic, so much of your work, and so much of your kind of written material that I've seen really speaks to that homeliness, that feeling of coming home again. And as you said in your bio, it's coming back to roots and coming back to home. So can you tell us, what does home mean to you?
Home to me, necessarily, as I've gotten older, has come to represent more than just a place.
Mhm.
It's a feeling. It's how you manage your life in general. I can be home and be thousands of miles away from my hometown. It's just and most of the comfort of home for me is being outside, being in the woods. My roommate and I sometimes go hiking up at Red Top Mountain, and whenever we go up there, it's a different feeling altogether.
Mm.
Once you're in the middle of the woods, once you're seeing the deer run, and here we get possums and things like that. And when you see those, you know that it's a different place. It becomes more
Mm.
magical. Um, I took a trip home not too long ago back to my old hometown and made it a point to go to some of the old home places and things like that. And those places don't exist anymore. You drive up to a piece of land and there's a chimney sitting there.
Right.
Um, so home has to become something different than a physical place. And with me, it encompasses the memories that I have of my childhood, of my grandma, um, my aunts. Everybody in my family was bigger than life, and they still are. I mean, trust me, even doing my ancestral workings, there are ones that come through louder than any of them. So home to me has become more of a place where I find myself internally and mentally.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. I really resonate with that piece about finding home, not in a particular place, but in a state of being. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I mean, you've kind of been all over the place. You're not originally from where you are now, which is just outside of
Right,
Atlanta, right? Yeah. Where
right.
are you originally from?
I'm originally from a little town called Monroe, North Carolina.
Mhm.
It's below Charlotte, and everybody knows Charlotte, but nobody knows Monroe typically. But it's just a little town just outside of Charlotte, a lot of farmland. Um, just growing up, it was just a courthouse down in the middle of town and little shops all around.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's small town living.
Mhm.
Then right out of high school, I moved to New York City to pursue a
Wow.
career in acting. And I had to work on losing the accent for a while, but then came back, and it came back with a vengeance.
Yeah.
I've lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've lived in Boone, North Carolina. I
Mm.
mean, so I've been all over the place.
I was gonna say, I didn't even realize you had lived in New York for a while. What was that like for you to go from small town North Carolina? Because I know what that feels like. Like I grew up in a small, very small town in Ontario, and I moved to Toronto, which is about the same size as New York. What was that like for you?
It was culture shock like you've
Yeah.
never seen. I mean, you're talking about somebody who was, my life was farm animals, just
Mhm.
a graduating class of 210 people,
Yeah.
and then moving to where you're essentially a dot compared to the population up there.
Mhm.
And of course, my first week up there, everybody was like, "Oh, say something for me. I want to hear you talk. I want to hear your accent." And I'm like,
Right.
"Okay." So that's
Right.
when I started working on trying to lose the accent. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to be stopped on the subway and asked to talk.
Yeah. No.
But
No.
it was a
Especially.
huge culture shock. I mean, I was used to grass and trees and things like
Mhm.
that. And up there to find grass and trees, you have to go to Central Park. And then back then, they didn't recommend even going into Central Park alone.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a wake up call. My first place was in Queens. There were six of us renting a house together. And I can remember waking up to the sound of cockroaches crunching under your feet. Yeah, so it wasn't a pleasant experience, but it was one in adaptability and survival.
Mhm. What? How did you adapt then? What did you find you changed? I mean, apart from your accent, which is a very common thing. I hear a lot of
Yeah.
Southerners say that. Yeah.
Well, I had to learn that. Well, first of all, I had to learn to navigate the city, which in the South, the worst navigation you get is getting behind a tractor on the roads. But I had to learn to navigate the subway system, the bus system. I mean, walking everywhere. You just it's a lot of change compared to where I grew up.
Yeah.
And also with the living situation, you have to kind of get yourself to the point that you're not grossed out by every little thing.
Mm,
Because I mean, in New York City, you see rats. I'm horrified of rats.
yeah.
So you learn jump over them and run.
Yeah.
Uh, in the South, you're taught to enjoy the animals that you're around. Up there, the first warning I got is don't touch the pigeons.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so as a Southerner coming into the big city, it's kind of like the movie Aaron Slick from Pumpkin Creek with Dinah Shore back decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it was a rude awakening for me. And people up there they had a reputation of being rude. It's not rude, it's just straightforward and busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, when you're on a schedule, you can't stop and take time to say hello to everybody like we do down south.
Yeah. Because you don't know everybody. Like millions of
Exactly.
people walking past you on the road. Absolutely.
Exactly. And a
Yeah.
stranger does not want to stop and nod.
No.
As opposed to down here in the South, everybody knows everybody's brother. You're related to somebody through somebody else's third cousin.
Mm.
So here it's pretty common. If you're at the Costco, you're going to nod to somebody or you're going to speak. Up there, not necessarily.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a very like common kind of rural attitude towards city people, though, is that they're rude, they're too busy. Same with Toronto people, like the idea that in New York people speak really quickly. It's the same in Toronto. Toronto just like right, and yet when they do slow down or when they do come to small towns, they love the fact that people are engaging with each other, right? Mm.
Well, and the thing is, it's just like back before I fully came out of the closet, I was dating a girl from New Jersey.
Mm.
And every time we would talk, she would say something and then it'd be, "Do you understand?" Then she'd say something else, "Do you understand?" And I was getting "Do you understand?" after every question or statement. And I finally looked at her and I said, "Honey, I am Southern, not stupid." I'm like, "I get it. I understand it. It's basic English."
Yeah.
I'm like, "I talk slower. Yeah, it comes with an accent, but
Mm.
trust me, I get what you're saying."
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of communication between different regions is the language essentially.
Yes.
I mean, trust me, I went up there and I've got slang that I put into my conversations and everything else. And people were like, huh?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, let me take the slang out and see if I can put it into regular English.
It's true. It's funny, isn't it? Like you only become aware of the slang that you use when you're, speak to somebody who doesn't use that slang. I find that all the time. I feel more Canadian when I talk to British people than I do British. It's the weirdest
Mhm.
thing, and I notice that I put A after a lot of things, right? Very strange.
Yeah. Well, and I have a lot of friends that are in Britain, Wales, Scotland. And even when I message them, I have to kind of make sure that I'm not including the slang that I would normally use because it's going to be completely Greek to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true. Some of the mutuals that we have, I notice that
Hmm.
they use bless you in a very different way. And I
Hmm.
realize like a lot of Southerners, oh, bless your heart, it's not as nice as you might say suggest it is, right? But over there,
Yeah.
they actually mean it. Like, oh, bless you, it's like, what, really?
Well, bless you is different in Southern than bless your heart.
Hmm.
If I say bless you, it's going to either be in the connotation of you sneezed or I really wish you blessings.
Right.
But if I say bless your heart, it's more of a derogatory. It depends on how you say it. Bless your heart is kind of one of those universal phrases in the South. If I say bless your heart, depending on how I say it, it can
Mm.
either mean you're dumb as dirt
Yeah.
or aren't you being just the cutest little thing?
Right. Yeah.
So, and typically the way I let it drip, you're going to know which one it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. The tone is really important.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's dripping with sarcasm, you know it's the you're dumb as dirt. I don't use that much. Typically, it's with people who don't realize what it means.
Mm. Yeah, it's true. That's the thing, right? It's safe to do that way, right?
Of course,
Yeah,
of course. But nowadays, people are getting to the point they know more of what it means.
yeah,
I think that that so many paths are so intertwined that now people are starting to see Southern phrases and know where they come from.
it's true. It's true. It's that gentrification of language. We're
Hmm.
experiencing something very similar up here in Ontario. People, and I think Southern US also has this too. But the whole like gidder done,
Hmm.
like gidder, right? A
Get
lot
her
of
done, yes.
gidder, right? A lot of people in the city are starting to use that unironically, or like they start talking about cow tipping
Hmm.
unironically, and they don't quite get it right, but it's like that now. Oh, don't take that away from us.
Yeah, and I know a lot of that language too,
Yeah,
especially the get her done. I mean, I worked on in the rodeo circuit too, so I got used to hearing that
yeah,
a lot of times from the cowboys. But and yes, I'm familiar with cow tipping.
yes, mhm,
Um,
yeah.
only did it once in my life. Didn't really enjoy it, but
I never actually counted. Friends of mine claimed that they did, but I never actually counted. Right? But then I never went to tent parties when I was younger.
I mean, I was more mischievous than anything as a kid. I mean, I was the one that if you told me don't pee on the electric fence, I peed on the electric fence. Yes, I got knocked back 10
Mm,
feet, but
mhm,
I still did it. If
right.
you told me not to, I'm probably going to do it to spite you.
Hmm.
I mean, like I said, more mischievous than anything. And I had a grandma that encouraged that because she
Yeah,
was just as mischievous as I was.
yeah.
I mean, she loved to live life vicariously through me. So a lot of times, if I would do something, she'd be in the background kind of snickering to herself just because she planted that little seed.
I love it. I love it. How does that relate? Let's get serious here then. How does
Okay.
that relate to you going into the church? Because I know that's a huge part. It was after you came back from New York, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So you entered the
So
church.
that is actually kind of a funny story in itself.
Hmm.
Um, being from the South, the church is just a big part of growing up. Um, and being kind of gay and or not kind of
Being
gay.
kind of gay.
Yeah, I'm about as gay as you can get. Being gay and different anyway, you kind of look for places that you can belong.
Hmm.
So at the age of 16, I started going to a little Methodist church down the road from the house, just looking for a sense of belonging.
Hmm.
So I had been going to that church for about a year and decided it was time to come out to the pastor. So I had just gathered every bit of strength I had, went into his office and said, I've got something I need to talk to you about. Well, he looks at me and he's like, I know what you're going to tell me. And I'm like, oh, you do? And he's like, yeah, you're called to ministry. And
Yes.
I was like, sure. It's easier than telling you I'm gay. So with that, I started pursuing ministerial studies or pastoral studies. Started at Pfeiffer University, which was Pfeiffer College back then. And it's in a little town called Meisenheimer, North Carolina.
Mm.
Then pursued seminary at Duke and worked through the Methodist Church for a while. Then started working with a group of youth in the Assemblies of God.
Mm.
So I spent some summers working at PTL with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker and all that good stuff, and finished my career within the within the Assemblies of God, and had been a youth minister, an associate pastor, music minister, just kind of hit all the corners of the church there. But it's so funny, I did eventually decide to come out to to my lead pastor. And it's funny the reactions you get, because you think you're going to get one particular type of reaction, especially within the Pentecostal church. And I go in and I'm like, just wanted to tell you something. And he's like, okay. I'm like, did you hear me? He's
It's
like,
so
I
funny
heard you.
because we actually blanked out and I didn't hear at all what you just said. Can you respond? Can you reply? Can you say what you
Sure,
just said again?
sure. I was saying that I went into his office with the intention of coming out.
Hmm.
And this was my lead pastor within the Assemblies of God. And I looked at him and I said, I'm gay. And he's like, okay. And he keeps reading. And I'm like, did you hear what I said? And he's like, yes, I heard what you said. He's like, did you grow an extra head? He's like, you're gay, go back to work. And I was like, all righty then. That wasn't the reaction I was expecting. So within the church, I don't have a lot of the bad feelings that a lot of people did or people do that came out of a background of the church.
Hmm.
I had very positive experiences.
Hmm.
Out of my 10 years working in the ministry, I probably had one negative experience.
Right.
And that was because somebody thought that because I was gay, I automatically had AIDS.
I see.
So my experiences with the church were very positive.
Hmm.
That boundary up with the church and still have contact with some of the people that I work with in the church. Just because I was offered the chance to be myself without any, and I was practicing witchcraft behind the pulpit. I
Hmm.
mean, I learned some of the best practices while I was working in the ministry. I learned how to manifest energy, how to stir up energy.
Hmm.
I learned meditation in the church. I learned how to use music in my craft through the church. One of my favorite things to do was when I was leading worship. That's one of the best ways to stir energy and to move energy around. And I learned how to incorporate that into my craft
Hmm.
and still do to this day. I mean, if I'm walking through the woods, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be singing, because if I do it in the house, I'm told to hush. But um, just learning, and I think sometimes we try to put limitations on our craft just because we close ourselves off to what other religions can offer. I'm not one of those that's going to condemn somebody of a different religion.
Hmm.
You do whatever you need to do.
Hmm.
Whatever works for you, let it work. For me, the church paved the way for witchcraft and helped me to see beneficial practices. And then again, like I said, I was never asked to compromise myself in the midst of that, except for when I went in to tell him I was gay and I accepted the call of the ministry.
It almost sounds though that something bigger was happening in that moment.
I think it was,
Yeah.
honestly. I believe that things happen for a reason.
Mm.
And I believe that I needed that time within the ministry
Right.
to learn more of who I was, to learn more about some practices and to get more of a background in religion.
Yeah.
I mean, my studies were all religious based. I mean, my classes were the psychology of world religions, things like that. One of the things that we did as part of one of my classes was we went to a tent revival. And to see how things manifest based on certain suggestions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it that way, we do the same thing in the craft.
Totally. Absolutely.
I mean, we use intention and suggestion for manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing there. I mean, it's like I've seen several memes. Christians call it prayer. We call it spells.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all in semantics.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe, yes, I needed that time to manifest who I am now.
Absolutely. The development phase. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose I'm gonna ask you a hard pressed question. This is what
Okay.
happened with this metaphorical kitchen table. A lot of people might be listening to you and feeling like you developed yourself through that time in the church, but you were within the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is your relationship to Jesus Christ, to God now? Do they still come into your practice? Have you kind of parted ways from them? What's your relationship to the spirits behind this religion?
As far as the Christian church, I have separated myself. I
Mm,
mean, but not to the point that I'm so close-minded about it.
right.
Because I mean, my family still uses a lot of that type of faith.
Mm,
Even my grandmother back when we were younger, I mean, her work was done out of the Psalms.
mm,
Yes, a lot of it would have probably been considered granny magic,
mm,
but even with Appalachian folk magic, the Bible is used a lot. The Christian faith is used.
mm,
So I don't have a distaste for it.
mm,
It's not something that I use in my daily practice. I tend to work more with ancestors and certain other deities.
mm,
I work a lot with Cernunnos, the Morrigan,
mm.
the kayak. I mean, and my background is my ancestry is primarily English, Irish, Scottish, a heavier concentration on the Scottish. So I try not to culturally appropriate. And of course, in the South, everybody's told that you've got Cherokee ancestry.
Ross.
Yeah, not everybody. So when I was doing my family tree, we were told growing up that we were Cherokee. Well, I found out that we weren't technically Cherokee. It was a step grandmother who was.
I
So
see.
I have no Cherokee blood in me,
I see.
but because of her, we still got some of the practices.
That makes sense. It's interesting because so I've had quite a few guests now over the span of my podcast. I've had Byron, I've had Brandon Weston, I've had Jay Con, and every single one of them has spoken about that piece around that sense of belonging, that sense of, you know, the homeland is over there, but we're here, even though this is our homeland too. Would you like in your opinion, and I know you also run a podcast through our own story.
Mm-hmm.
What role does that story of the Cherokee ancestry play, do you think?
I think in the beginning of my practice, it played a lot more because I tried to incorporate that. But when I found out that there was no Cherokee in there, I'm not one for cultural appropriation. So I'm not going to use that in my craft. I mean, there are still pieces I can use to honor that culture, but I'm going to stick to what I know. And as I've grown in my practice, it's evolved. And I think that's huge for us to realize that it's okay for your craft to change. If you stay the same, you're staying stagnant. And I'm okay with leaving certain parts behind and incorporating new pieces. And back to the part of home that you touched on, a big part of my craft is allowing others to experience that place, offering that option for other people. I want you, when you come into my circle, when you come into my presence, I want you to feel at home. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to know that you're in a safe place. That if you tell me something, I'm not going to blab it to everybody and their brother. There's no kindness or empathy in that. And like I said, as I've grown in my practice, we all go through those phases of I'm going to curse, I'm going to hex, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be a mean old witch, I'm going to do this. So I found that as I grow, that kindness is huge. Empathy is huge. People are hurting. And they're hurting not only in the craft, but they're hurting in other religions too. And we have to be able, as witches and magical practitioners, to offer healing, even outside of our own circles. And you probably fall into this as much as I do. On a daily basis, I get nonstop messages. And they're messages from people who are hurting and who are confused. I can try to brush them off, but that's not what they need.
Right.
That's not what I need. I mean, that would be the worst thing I could do. And whether you believe in karma or not, or whether you believe in the threefold law, which I'm not Wiccan, I'm more independent, tend to lean toward traditional, but I believe that you get what you put out. And if I offer someone kindness, if I offer somebody empathy, that's at some point going to be returned to me when I need it most.
Right.
And I'm also one that believes in building the magic of other people.
Yes, we talked about this one before.
Yes. I want to see you succeed. I want to see you walking in the fullness of your practice. And if I can contribute to that, that's my goal. I'm not one that just sits around watching the hope to see other people fail. If they believe differently than I do, go for it. Believe what you need to believe to get you through. Practice what you need to do to get you through. I know what works for me. I know what's worked for me for decades. I'm an old man. I'm used to relearning things. And I think that's huge. We've got to stay teachable.
Absolutely.
So many times my frustrations, especially on Facebook and Instagram, are those who put absolutes out. That this is the way it is. There's no exception. Maybe for you, but there are exceptions. I mean, one person may practice traditional magic. That's the only way for them. Somebody else may do fairy tradition. That's fine. If that's what works for you, if that manifests the magic for you, then by all means, pursue what you need to pursue. All I'm going to do is encourage you in it.
Absolutely. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? I've certainly fallen into this trap myself. I think a lot of people do at times, in that want to belong oftentimes that comes with the kind of adage of you need to then put down, right? We see this a lot with people who are coming and converting into other religions, right? Particularly,
Mhm.
right? It's an idea of, it's that mental process of dissociation from that thing. But in so doing, we end up disrespecting others in ways that we, I don't think, later in life would really intend to, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that we all are so encompassed by our own trauma
Hmm.
that sometimes we can't see past that trauma.
Hmm.
One of the sections of the book that I've got is working with ancestor magic for healing trauma.
Mm.
And I'm not a psychologist. Trust me, my background is in psychology.
Mhm.
I had to do that for the ministry because of
Yes.
the counseling. But the biggest thing that I talk about is there are ways to deal with trauma with magic, but I also believe in magic, meditation, medication, and mediation.
Right.
Use all of them.
Mm.
Don't just think that magic's going to fix it.
Oh,
Sometimes,
100%.
yeah, trauma can be so deep rooted. And trust me, having been through it myself,
Hmm.
um, I was, I don't like using the word victim of, I dealt with sexual abuse
Mm.
as a youngster. Um, and in that, I had to realize that it wasn't about me.
Mm.
It was about the other person.
Hmm.
And for years, I had held on to the fact that it was me. It was something I did. And I know that a lot of religions talk about forgiveness.
Mm.
I understand that process. I don't have to forgive the person that did it. The forgiveness I had to do was to me.
That's huge. Yes.
I had to forgive myself for blaming myself for something that I wasn't responsible for. Forgiveness is a tool for of freedom,
Absolutely, it is.
not for the other person.
Yeah.
It's for me.
Yeah, that's huge.
I can get past the abuse.
Mm.
Now it's kind of like in my own mind, it's an afterthought. It happened,
It
but
happened.
it doesn't make me who I am.
Right. Right.
Overcoming it's what made me who I am.
That's huge. That's really important too, because so many people do get caught up on that piece around forgiveness, right?
Mhm. They think that they have to forgive the person that did it to them. No, you don't.
Yeah.
No,
It's that they think they have to condone what that other person,
exactly.
right?
And
Right.
I never condoned it.
Hmm.
And that person, the person that did it to me, has passed on,
Right.
and I have no animosity toward them.
Hmm.
I honestly don't have any feelings toward them at all.
Hmm.
But that's because I've worked through what I've needed to work through. And I did that through medication, mediation. I went through years of counseling.
Yes.
Um, and I've used magic. I've used ancestor magic. Go back to the source.
Well, I'm curious about that if we can, because one question I always get asked, and I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody who ever writes anything on ancestor work is asked, is how do I deal with those problematic ancestors, right? The people who we discover did things that we don't want to condone or are not forgivable. What's your take on that? What's your
You have
answer?
the option of not working with them.
Hmm.
I have a I don't want to say a set number, but I have certain ancestors that I love to work with, and certain ones I won't go near.
Hmm.
The ones I work with have places on my ancestor altar. The big one is, and I talk about her a bit in the book, my great great grandmother Thula.
Hmm.
Thula was my wild card. I adore Thula.
Hmm.
Thula. So my grandmother's maiden name was Pig, just to let you know. and you've seen the post on Facebook about having a great great grandma named Christmas Pig. But Thula's last name was Pig. Thula had children by several different men. Thula was unusual for that time frame. This was like the 1800s.
Right.
And she decided she didn't need a man to make her an honest woman. She had her kids. She raised her kids on her own. Rumor has it that all the kids were by different daddies. She was a strong-willed woman, and she said what she thought.
It sounds amazing.
Yes, she is my go-to. If I'm dealing with something that I don't know how to handle, if I need a little bit of gumption about me, she's the one I engage. Now, my uncle Zeb, it was rumored that he had the second sight and that he couldn't quiet the voices in his head. So he committed suicide.
Yeah.
So a lot of that history, the ancestors, but I've found that working with Zeb is the most vocal in death.
Right.
Zeb's the one that will come to me in the dreams at 3 a.m. and I'm like, Zeb, can we talk later?
Right. He wants attention, right?
Yeah, it's like need some sleep.
Yeah.
And then I've got like my grandmothers that I work with, and just like with the person that sexually abused me, that person will never come on to my ancestor altar.
Right.
There's no need. I have those that work perfectly with me. And when I talk about healing the trauma, one of the big things that was passed down through my ancestry was depression and suicide. So that's when I say go straight to the horse's mouth. Find out what the issue was working with your ancestors. It may be something similar to what you're dealing with. With me, with the depression, I've found that medication is a big help there, but knowing where it started,
right,
is huge.
Right. So what happened? Please help our listeners to understand that process a bit more for you. So understanding that was huge. What shifted? What changed?
With me, it was learning that there was a history associated, because I thought, you know how you kind of isolate yourself in the midst of depression and things like that, and it becomes all about you.
Yes.
I'm the only one who's ever experienced this. Nobody else in my family has ever gone through this.
They can't understand, right?
Exactly. Nobody understands this. But when you start doing the ancestor work and you start doing the digging, you realize there was a history of this. There's a reason why you're feeling this. You're not the only one. And whether you believe in generational curses, whether you believe in things that are passed down through the generations, I believe that working with your ancestors can help with the healing. Just like knowing that a big part of what Zeb dealt with were the voices. And yes, I have the same things happening to me, but learning that there are ways to deal with it. And it's important to let your ancestors teach you too. Because when it came to Zeb was the one that was like, I didn't know how to understand or control the voices. I didn't know how to block them when I needed to. So learning that you have to put boundaries up. And I think people have issue with that. They think spirit is spirit and spirit kind of trumps everything. You need boundaries there as well as you do anywhere else.
Right. So let's just underline that then. Boundaries with the spirit. Because I often see this too. People come to me and they think that just because they've had a message and this is often why people get scammed, because they're in that mindset of, oh, somebody's coming with message to me, right? And then they're assuming they're opening doors up that don't necessarily need to be opened up. They are taking on responsibility for things that isn't their responsibility, right? Yeah.
and I'm going to put this out there too,
Mm,
because this happens on Instagram a lot.
mhm.
You get these little spam messages that says, I was called by your ancestors to give
Yes.
you a message. Okay, this is my response to that. My ancestors know me. They're going to talk to me first.
Mm,
So don't come at me with my ancestors have a message for me. I know when they have a message for me because they come to me before they'll come to anybody else. Be careful who you let in your circle.
mhm.
I'm very careful about who I let read for me.
Mhm.
I have a handful of people that I trust.
Mm,
I have certain people that I allow to speak into my life. Um, and I will let you know that too. It's good. It's okay to tell people this is something that I'm not willing to accept from you.
mhm.
Um, if somebody messages you on Facebook, on Instagram, and they're like, I want to give you a reading, if you're
Mm.
not comfortable with that, tell them you're not comfortable with that. Put
Absolutely.
those boundaries up.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
even do that with your friends too. There are,
Very
I
important.
mean, I have friends that I'm just friends with. I have friends that I'm acquaintances with, and not everybody gets the opportunity to speak into my life or my craft.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. People need to have boundaries when it comes to all of this. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like well, I got into a situation, somebody in my own life like that. They wanted to do a New Year's reading for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I said, I know I've got a godfather who I can go to, a former godfather who I can go to.
Mm-hmm.
And they took it personally. And at that moment, it was like, okay, I see what this was all about. This was about you, not me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It was important that I put that. But this is the thing. There are far too. I feel like when people come into these practices, people start to find their way, right, or start to explore their abilities, if you want to call it that way. There's an enthusiasm, but there's also a taking things way too personally, right?
Exactly.
And this is where
Exactly.
it becomes very important. I'm curious with ancestors, then. For you, I'm curious about your perspective on this.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I teach is that the ancestors are not static, they're not stuck in the past. We
Right.
often relegate them to that past because that's the story that we're hearing. But they're, in my opinion, they're beings that continue to thrive, continue to have their own experiences. When it comes to kind of putting those boundaries up with the ancestors, um, what is your, I guess, your preferred way of establishing those boundaries with ancestors?
I tend to work with ancestors the way I work with anybody that's around me.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't treat them as woo
Yeah.
ghosty type. Mm-mm.
Hmm.
I mean, they're an entity, they're a being,
Hmm.
so I address them as such. If I'm sleepy, I'm typically like, okay, Zib, I need sleep.
Hmm.
So with me, I'm one of those what comes up comes out type people.
Hmm.
I'm going to say what I think. And typically, the way I work with ancestors is the same way. I'm bluntly honest, straightforward. I don't beat around the bush.
Hmm.
It's just say what I need to say,
Yes.
do what I need to do. And it's like it's along that same line of what you're talking about. They're not static. They're not dwelling in that past. They've moved on. They're in another plane, but they're very much aware of present day.
Mm.
I mean, just like with my Uncle Zeb, I mean, he's very much aware of what I'm dealing with on a daily basis.
Mm.
And that's where the teacher comes out in it. This is how you work with this. This is how you deal with this. This is what I did wrong. I mean, it's not like I'm getting ancestors that come to me speaking King James English, but
Right. It's
I
true. No,
mean,
it's true. It's
yeah,
interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, and like my great grandma Thula, she's rough as a cob,
Mm.
and that's a Southern phrase. So I mean, there's no pretense about her. She is who she is, and she comes across that way.
Mm.
And same thing with my grandmas. I mean, my grandma Willa, or as we call her, Mama, I mean, she was always bigger than life, and
Mm,
that's how she comes through. I mean, she's always laughed, she always sang, and a lot of times that's how she'll make herself known to me is a song will get stuck in my head that she used to sing. And I have this visual of her when she would cook in the kitchen, she kept her radio on. She loved music. And if you ever saw her start shimmying towards you like this, you knew you were in trouble. You were going to dance in the kitchen. So that was just very much her.
mm,
So, like, if I'm driving down the road and a certain song comes on the radio,
mm.
I'm like, okay, Mama's thinking about me, or Mama's making herself known.
Yeah, that's a really important piece too, and it's understanding the difference there, right? Is
Hmm.
is intuitively knowing when this is a message, when this isn't a message, right? Yeah.
Well, and that's one thing that I encourage people to do too. Pay attention to things around you. Pay attention to smells. Um, Sometimes, oh my gosh, Mama wore the worst gardenia smelling perfume I've ever smelled in my life. It was from Avon. Oh, it just stunk to high heaven.
Mm,
But if I ever get just a whiff of that scent, I
mhm,
know that she's present.
mm,
Um, just and it's the same thing with certain ants.
mhm,
I mean, like my aunts were, my grandma's sisters were always just, they were loud, they were boisterous, they were bigger than life. Their laughter was a screech. I mean, I was horrified of them when I was little, but I learned that that's just who they were.
Yeah,
And there are times I'll be out and I'll hear that screechy laughing type sound. And I'm like, okay, Christine's making herself known.
right, right. Yes, and it's true. It's funny how even in like regular life, right, other people, other things can just be kind of like an overlay on top of them, right? They might not be
Mhm,
intending to come across that way, but it's that whole like, oh, this is a signal I can come through. Yeah,
mhm.
yeah, that
Well,
makes sense.
and it's like I said, just be cognizant of what's happening in your day-to-day life.
Mhm.
I mean, you kind of have to be in a mode where you're constantly listening. And I don't think that it's one of those things where you have to just stay on alert all the time. You just keep your listening tuned to spirit, and you'll never miss it. It's one of those things that when I'm walking through the woods, I think that's the most in tune I get,
Mm,
because in that time, if I close my eyes, I can hear the wind, even as faintly as it can be. You can hear the song of the trees,
mm,
the rustling. You can see the chipmunks, the spiders, all that.
mhm,
And I think most people in a walk through the woods would ignore that
mm.
unless they walked into the spider web.
Right.
But with me, it's a time of being able to just kind of connect. And yes, as I walk through the woods, I'm going to touch the trees
Hmm.
and make sure I know what the ground feels like under my feet.
Hmm.
Um, Take notice of the smells and the scents. Like this time of year, especially, you start getting the scent of the decaying leaves and the evergreens.
Yes.
And like it's been rainy for the past couple of days, so you get that nice, almost musty, woodsy smell from the rain. So it's just a matter of keeping yourself on alert for things that might have a message, things that might want to talk to you in that moment. And yes, I do fall into animism quite a bit. So everything does
So,
have that spirit. Everything does, it does emit that energy.
hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I try to keep myself awakened to that.
Cognizant of it, right? Aware
Mhm.
of it. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. I feel like especially when people are starting on this path and moving into an animistic point of view, it can be just like becoming aware of everything. And then people become really
Mhm.
overwhelmed with it. Even within what you're saying, there's discernment, isn't there? There's
Mhm.
boundaries that you have to erect.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it is still about boundaries. Even when
Yes.
you're out there, you can become overwhelmed. There's so much going on. If you try to tune into all of the energies. Oh my gosh.
I know, right?
It's like peeing on that electric fence.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing is learning to isolate the sounds, learning to isolate the energies.
Mm.
Like if I want to work with a certain element at a time, it's okay for me to tune out the other elements for a bit and concentrate on that one. And I'm very much a fire sign, and I'm I know that my mother would tell me I'm a pyromaniac, but I'm one that I love the way a fire looks, smells, feels, the energy that it puts out. Um, so I work with fire a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but I also work with earth, air, spirit, water, all of those. Um, they all have something to teach us. And I've also found that if you concentrate too heavily on one area, you become imbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's important for me to look at the craft holistically,
Mm-hmm.
to see all of the pieces. Because if I try to concentrate, and I think that's a lot of times where the new practitioners find themselves out of balance.
Mm.
They find one area, and that's the area that interests them. So that's where they throw all their concentration instead of letting themselves veer off the path every so often. It's important to take those little side trips. I mean, think about it. When you're going out on your walks, some of the best stuff is found when you veer off the regular path
Mm-hmm.
and go off the little offshoots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm nosy. I'm going to do that.
Right. No, that
So,
makes sense. That makes sense though. Like something I find one of my major criticisms of our industry, of the publishing industry, is that you get books on very particular topics,
mhm,
and then it becomes a responsibility of us writers to be able to create those opportunities where people can veer off the path, right? So,
mhm,
like the ancestral work, right? I'm bringing in all sorts of other things because it's all connected. It's
mhm.
we create these, these compartmentalizations. But I think that there's at least a developmental need for that too. It's timey-wimey, right?
Mhm.
It's all timey-wimey. I want to ask you, as we're vastly coming to the end of the session soon, but I'm curious about then your book in stepping into kind of writing your newest project. What was going on in your process then, connected to what we were just talking about, that idea of veering off into different things, bringing in other elements. What was that like for you in sitting down and writing this particular topic?
I write very much like I think.
Mm-hmm.
So if my brain goes over here, I'm kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the dog Doug.
Yes.
It's like, okay, I'm doing this, squirrel.
Yeah.
That's very much how I write.
Mm.
So I essentially have pages of notes. I mean, just pages of notes that I had to just sift through constantly as I was writing because I tend to go off on those little offshoots.
Mhm.
And even in the book is called The Simple Magic of Wild Things, and it's essentially my personal journey.
Mm.
So in this book, not only do I talk about ancestral worship, but I also talk about some of the areas that I've had to grow in and learn.
Mm.
One of those is the magic of encouragement.
Right.
Another section is learning to anticipate the unknown. Another is rekindling passion,
Mm.
rekindling joy. Because if you think about it, as we age in our practice, and I've been doing this for decades now, it can become very much mundane. It can become more ritual than anything.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just like the mainline church.
Mm-hmm.
It can become repetitious.
Absolutely.
So I've had to grow in my own path and learn how to rekindle the passion for from when I was just starting out. And if you think about when you're just starting out, how new everything is and how shiny and everything has a magic and a spark.
Mm-hmm.
It still has that, but we've let our senses dull to it.
Mm.
Same thing with joy. As I was talking
Mm.
about Mama earlier, she always laughed. I mean, trust me, she had her trials and her tribulations, as
Mm-hmm.
the old people called it back then. But the thing is, she chose not to dwell on those.
Right.
She chose to look for the joy in things.
Mm.
She chose to make herself laugh at things that necessarily wouldn't have been laughable.
Mm.
Um, I can remember, oh my gosh, she was such a spitfire. And just to sit down with her and listen to her tell the stories of growing up. I mean, growing up for her was hard,
Mm.
but she never spun it that way.
Right.
It was always about the good memories.
Mm.
And I think in today's society, we dwell too many times on the bad. We try to find the bad.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And if I can just take a note from her
Mm.
and learn how to embrace the good memories,
Mm.
embrace the good pieces of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do I agree with everybody and what they put out there? No, I don't. Do I need to vocalize that? No, I don't.
Makes
It's not
sense.
important. If it works for them, it works for them. But I think that life in general has become about more than looking at your circumstances and situations. If I dwelt on the issues in life, I would live my life so depressed.
Mm.
And I think that's a part of it, learning to walk through it without getting bogged down in it.
That makes sense. No, that makes sense. I love that. Well, the book sounds great. The book sounds like it's going to be a salve for people wanting to go deeper. I'm curious, why this book now? We've only got about 5 minutes left. Why this book now?
It's funny, this book has actually been decades in the making.
Decades in the making.
Yes, I had a blog for years,
Mm.
and that's where I would record some of the stuff and things like that. But I just felt like it was time for my voice to be heard.
Mm.
Um, People don't always need an academic study of things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they need that personal.
Mm.
Sometimes they need to know that what they're feeling is normal. What they're going through is not unique just to them.
Right.
And I feel like my book addresses that.
Mm.
It talks about the happy, it talks about the sad, it
Mm.
talks about ancestor worship, it talks about passion, it talks about death, life. I mean, a little bit of everything. And people need that now. They need to know they're not alone.
That's huge. That's huge. Especially this, well, I don't even want to say aging population, but I feel like we're in such a different phase of the community, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
certainly seeing it as well. You know, before the pandemic to now, people have gone through such a big experience in the world and continue to go through big experiences in the world. I feel you on that one. The
And
book's coming out. Sorry, go on.
it's time that we live by example.
Yeah, I agree. I very much agree. The book's coming out through Rebel Satori.
It is.
It is, yeah. You're looking at maybe March or sometime in the mid-year of
We're
2020.
looking at the early part of 2024.
Okay, perfect. If people want to find out more about it, where can they go?
I have a Facebook page, and that Facebook page, and I always have to go back to it, is called The Weathered Wise Man.
Mhm.
I also have Instagram, and that is weathered underscore wise man underscore real.
Okay. I'll make sure
Um,
that goes down below.
Perfect. And then I'm currently working on a website and a Patreon, so we'll get
Wonderful.
those up and running. And
Yeah,
And
because
maybe
I
there's
mean,
a
as
new
writers, we have to have everything now, don't we?
that's the truth. I never realized there was so much to this.
No, but I mean, neither did I. Now, apart from all of that, you also are involved in a podcast. Do you want to briefly talk about the podcast?
I am. The podcast is called excuse me, I'm going to pull it up while we're on. And it's called the Storybook Podcast. They're also on Facebook and Instagram. Um, and Frater Aaron is the facilitator.
Hmm.
But what we do is we take fairy tales, folk tales, things like that. We have certain guests on each episode, and we look at how that folk story or that fairy tale can be applied to our practices.
I love that, and it's a great like the episodes I've listened to have been amazing so far.
It's a lot of fun. It really is to get the different perspectives. We've covered everything from hoodoo to folk magic to traditional magic, you name it.
Well, and I feel like this is the thing. People are re-looking at folklore, not just as kind of superstitious stories sent to the nursery, really as foundational,
Mm-hmm.
not even text, but foundational stories to enter into and then overlay on, right? I'm seeing a lot of that in a lot of my therapy work. A lot of people are
Mm-hmm.
interested in with narrative work, going into their own story and kind of retconning, I guess, right? Really looking
Mm-hmm.
at the world through that. So but the fairy tales, I absolutely loved it. Not least because I happen to be in a fairy tale class right now. So happens, That's awesome.
Exactly.
Well, Dave, this has been wonderful. Thank you for coming to the kitchen table, the proverbial kitchen table, and chatting with me today. I'll make sure that all of those links are down below. For everybody who's listening or watching us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. And this has been Dave Gaddy. I've been Ben Stimson, and have a good rest of the week. Have a good one.